don't usually send things in like this because I'm a very reserved person and spend most of my time watching life from the sidelines, but something happened to me this year. After hearing so many of your stories from other people, it's made me want to get mine out too. I live near a forest preserve in Michigan, not far from a cluster of old Cold War radar towers that most locals don't even know exist. On the night of June 21st at around 11 p.m., I was walking with my dog Spencer, who was a fat little beagle, on one of the wooded trails near my house. I rarely walk that late, but on that particular night I needed to clear my head after something personal that had been going on. Not even 10 minutes into our walk, I began to see what looked like the lights from a low-flying plane through the branches of the trees. When we got to a more open part of the trail, I was able to get a much better view and could see that it was actually 3 separate lights that were arranged in a triangle, and they were very low. I could also hear a humming sound as it moved toward the trail, which led me to believe I was seeing someone flying drones around. As it moved perpendicular to the trail and was getting close to crossing over us, it became clear that it was one solid object and not 3 drones. The small lights on it were slowly changing in brightness, but more interestingly, the bottom surface of this object had its own iridescent glow with colors that looked like oil swirling on water. I stopped walking to watch, and I was debating whether I should be afraid or fascinated. When it was fully overhead and directly above the trail, all 3 lights faded out. It didn't happen instantly. They dimmed down until they were out, but I could still faintly see the oil slick colors on the bottom surface. When this happened, the entire forest noticeably went silent. The wind and the insects just stopped. Spencer also sat down fast at my feet like I had given him the command to sit, even though I hadn't. Then, as clear as if there were people standing around me, I heard a sound like voices whispering. This was an intensely scary thing to hear while alone, and everything in me tensed up. I pulled Spencer's leash and we ran the way we'd come all the way back to the car. When we were finally in the car and driving back to the house, I kept chanting to myself that it wasn't real, but I knew it was. When we got home, I drank 2 beers to calm down and put on reruns of Mythbusters to distract myself enough to go to sleep. During that very restless night, I barely slept and had one single dream. I dreamt that I was in a white room without any walls or corners that I could see. Standing in front of me was a roughly human shape, but I could only see it when it was vibrating, almost like it was made out of visible sound waves, and I apologize if that's a horrible description. There was no face that I could see, but I still knew it was someone, and I knew they were there with me. I didn't have any communication with this person, but I was shown images of places I've never seen anywhere. A specific image that I'll always remember looked like a moonscape with enormous towers jutting out of the surface. Everything I saw was beautiful and amazing, but mostly all I could feel was confusion. I couldn't figure out why I was seeing all these places. When I woke up from the dream, a gut feeling about what had happened on the trail stayed with me, and I felt sure I'd had some kind of contact event. It was after that dream that my life started to change. The first thing I noticed was that I kept seeing the number 314. It had no meaning to me, but it happened over and over again. So many times it was laughable and it felt intentional. I would regularly check my phone and see that it was 314, or I would see the number and part of a license plate in front of me on the road. I also had a bag of apples at the grocery store weigh in at exactly 3.14 pounds, and I even got a restaurant receipt where the sales tax was a perfect $3.14. I know the human mind is great at spotting patterns even when there aren't any, but this was actually happening, and it was on an almost daily basis. I also started having small stretches of time where I would drift off and not remember what I'd been doing or even thinking about. I wouldn't call it lost time, but I also wouldn't call it zoning out. They were more like small daydreams that I couldn't control. One of these happened while I was sitting in my car in a Walmart parking lot. I remember pulling into the parking space and staring out the front window for over 20 minutes. I didn't even turn the car off or remove my seatbelt. The weird part is I knew I was doing it, but I still couldn't pull myself out of that state of concentration. I swear it felt like I was getting an update. These episodes became a regular thing. I finally got a hold of an old friend to talk about what had been going on. He had always been into sightings and abduction cases and things like that because of an experience he had had as a kid, and he seemed like the one and only person in my life who would take me seriously. We spent a lot of time talking, which really helped me get things off my chest, but after our conversations, I became convinced something more had happened to Spencer and me on the trail. I wasn't ready to say I'd been abducted, but I sure noticed a change after my sighting. These things that were happening seemed random and totally out of my control, and after a month of noticing them more and more, I started to feel something else that's hard to explain. I got an overall sense of a presence with me, or maybe it was more like being watched. This wasn't in a bad or a good way, just an indifferent presence that I could feel. And as I continued seeing the number 314 everywhere and having blank daydreams, I knew this presence was part of it, or maybe more accurately, causing it. Most recently, and this started just this past fall, I've been occasionally seeing things in the sky again. I will catch very small lights that I think are planes until the lights suddenly go off. Then a minute later, the lights will come on again. All of these sightings just so happen to be over that same wooded area near my house. I have seen this happen 4 or 5 times since October, and I don't want to sound like a nut, but I almost want to call them a signal. I'll catch myself scanning the sky for them all the time, and on the rare occasions that I do see them, they're now accompanied by a draw or a pull to go back to that trail. Maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like something is trying to get me back over there. I don't know what's going on, but I can still feel this presence close to me even today. I also can't tell if it's a singular being or a group that's interfering with my thoughts and my life. I want to say it's more than one though. Trust me when I say I've tried to ignore all of it, but then I'll see that number again or space out for 10 minutes like I'm getting a reminder that they're not finished with me. When I was younger, my sister and I were on a back road in Missouri that runs between Warrensburg and Highway 13 to visit her friend up in Higginsville. She was 18 and driving, and I was 15 in the passenger seat next to her. The road we were on is basically dead straight from the time you leave town until you hit the highway, and it's very rural. I don't remember the time, but it was completely dark out and raining. At that time in my life, I wanted to be a pilot more than anything, and I was obsessed with aviation. I had flight simulators on my computer and a half-dozen model planes in my room, and even a few vintage pilot training books that were way over my head, but I would read, watch, or study anything I could get my hands on. I also felt like I knew every type of aircraft ever made. As we were driving, both of us noticed what looked like the lights of a helicopter or maybe a small plane out in front of us, but they were alarmingly low. When I first saw it, I thought it looked like a plane taking off because it was ascending, but as we kept getting closer, I realized something had to be wrong. I watched it drop and then climb, or at least try to, only to drop back down again. It was also moving way too slowly to be a plane, so after seeing this erratic flying, I was almost certain it was a helicopter, and if that's what it was, it looked like it was struggling to stay in the air. I was completely glued to the windshield and annoying my sister with my ideas about what could be happening. As we got even closer, it was obvious this aircraft was barely crawling through the sky, if not just hovering in one spot very close to the ground. When we finally got to it, I rolled my window all the way down, expecting to hear an engine or rotor blades, but I couldn't hear anything over the wet tires on the road. My sister finally stopped the car because it was dead center over the road and she didn't want to drive directly underneath it. We sat there staring out the windshield with the rain coming in my open window, waiting for a helicopter to come crashing down. As it kept falling, it got to a height that couldn't have been more than 40 feet above the road and only 100 feet out in front of the car. Then it stopped. It wasn't ascending or descending or moving in any direction. It was totally stationary in the air, and I couldn't even guess what it was. I was born too curious for my own good, sometimes to the point of putting myself in danger, so my instinct wasn't to panic. It was to get out and walk as close as I could on foot, and that's exactly what I did. I opened the door and started walking, even though my sister was telling me to stay there. I walked up the road until I was directly underneath it with my head cocked all the way back in total disbelief. Above me was the most stunning and jaw-dropping aircraft I had ever seen. It was shaped like an elongated teardrop and had only a few small lights on the nose and the sides. It was so close I could have thrown a rock and hit it. It looked to be somewhere in the range of 50 feet in length and maybe only 15 to 20 feet wide with beautifully rounded edges. I saw no wings, no engines, no stabilizers or rudder, and no landing gear. It was completely featureless, and I was in awe of how it could even be in the air. Here's the kicker. I still couldn't hear a sound coming out of it. I could only hear the rain coming down, and I wasn't even getting wet anymore because it was that close and acting like an umbrella over me. The way it was sitting in the sky was like gravity wasn't a factor, and it was the most unbelievable thing I have ever witnessed. I had completely forgotten my sister was there when out of nowhere she ran up to me in a panic and pulled my arm to come back to the car. I yelled at her and told her I wanted to watch, but she was losing her mind and grabbed my bare wrist with her fingernails digging into the skin and refused to let go. She was screaming at me and saying I was going to get taken by aliens, which sounded hilarious. The entire time this was happening, I had only imagined it being a military aircraft. I swear the thought of UFOs or aliens hadn't crossed my mind even once. Because she was bigger than me, she pulled me to the car and finally let go of my wrist, then literally shoved me into the seat and slammed the door. Then when she jumped in, she did a wild U-turn and took off. The only thing I could do was turn around in the seat and watch as she drove away. I never saw it move again or take off, so I have no idea what happened to it. Obviously, we skipped going to her friend's house and she drove straight back home instead. When we got there, my sister told the whole story to our parents. She was sitting there forcing me to back her up, which I did, but my attitude about it was so far from hers, I don't think our parents knew what to believe. At no point during what we experienced did I feel like we were in danger, and I told them that. Like I said, I was in awe, and the majority of my thoughts had been trying to figure out how it was staying in the air. This has been a story in our family for a long time, as well as an unforgettable event that my sister and I shared. Our beliefs on what we saw couldn't be more opposed, though. She still thinks that we saw a real bona fide UFO with aliens that were seconds away from abducting me. I think that's silly. I believe what we saw was a classified military aircraft that was either on a test flight or was possibly having problems, and it was an accident that we saw it. I'm not saying I don't believe in other life out there, I definitely do, but I find it far more plausible that we saw something from right here on Earth, and honestly, I can only hope that we have that level of highly advanced aircraft and weapon systems that are secretly being tested and hidden away from the public. I don't want to be on the losing end of World War III, which I'm sure is coming someday. I have to say, this experience only deepened my interest in aviation. I came away from it with a whole different view of propulsion and what might be possible, or even what is a reality and in use now. All I can say is please look up, because you never know what you're going to see. I had two life-changing events happen to me back to back, and I've never been able to explain what it was. This was at the end of 2012, and I was working for a company that occasionally sent our crews out of town for days and even weeks on our larger commercial jobs. On one of these jobs, I was sent up north to Williston, North Dakota. They put our crew up in a motel just a few minutes away from the job site, and I don't know why, but the hotel upgraded me to a larger room that had a king-sized bed and a couch in it. Because I have a minor case of OCD, I like to separate my outfits and lay them out for each day when I'm out of town. In this larger room, I used the couch for this and put each neatly stacked outfit next to one another all the way across the cushions. Also, I was scheduled to be there for 8 days, so I brought my entire desktop computer and monitor with me. I did this because I was in the early stages of starting my own business then, and I had a checklist of things I was hoping to get done in my off time at night. On day 3 of this trip, and right after 1 a.m., I was sitting at the computer which I had set up on the desk in my room. I was specifically working on a folder of images that were going to the guy building my website, but I was also frustrated and in the middle of an argument with my wife on Facebook Messenger in another window. Right in the middle of typing, I felt this immediate vibration come through the floor and into my feet. It was so sudden and noticeable that I pushed my chair back to look under the desk. Then this vibration went through my entire body, and in that moment I thought we were having a small earthquake. This vibration was extremely fast too. Actually, it was so fast that it felt like it was shaking the organs inside my body, and I mean that literally. It was almost painful. I remember turning toward the door because the plastic fins on the air conditioning unit under the window were violently rattling, and it was incredibly loud. I could see them shaking so fast that it made them look blurry, and that's the point where my memory hit a brick wall. I have nothing after seeing that. The next thing I experienced was jerking awake. It happened fast, and I didn't wake up in a groggy or gradual way. When I jumped up, I realized that I had been lying flat on my back across the couch and on top of my stacks of clothing. It was also just after 4 o'clock in the morning. The lights were still on, and I was panicking. It was a giant shock to my system. Once I got my bearings and remembered what I'd been doing, I checked my computer, which took moving the mouse to get it out of screensaver mode. The first thing I saw was the Facebook Messenger window. I still had a half-written, unsent message sitting there, and my wife had sent a string of messages starting at 1:07 a.m. There was message after message from her over the course of 2 hours. My phone was still sitting next to the mouse, and when I checked that, I also had missed calls and texts from her. In the years since this happened, I have looked pretty deeply into lost time, and I've heard a lot of people claim that at first, they thought they might have passed out or fallen asleep. This wasn't like that at all. I didn't for a second believe I had done either one of those things. I thought something had either physically knocked me out cold like a blow to the head, or that I had been exposed to some kind of chemical or gas like a carbon monoxide leak in the hotel room. And just for the record, no other substances of any kind were involved. I've never even had a beer on a work trip, and I felt paranoid because of that fact, like something was seriously wrong with me. I spent the next hour and a half on the phone with my wife, wishing she was there and explaining exactly what had happened. The stupid argument we'd been having was forgotten, and she was a rock for me that night when I desperately needed one. I give her 100% of the credit for keeping me calm and sane while I was alone in that room. I never ended up going back to bed because who could sleep after that? Then I got dressed, and my manager was out front at 6:30 to take us to the job site. I must have looked rough because when we were picking up coffee on the way, my boss asked me if I was doing okay. I didn't have it in me to talk about what had actually happened, so the only thing I did was ask if he'd felt a small earthquake or shaking in his room overnight. I also asked 2 of the other guys this same question, including the one staying next door to me. None of them felt or heard anything. For the next few days after this, all I did was work and sleep, and everything seemed fine. I felt good physically, and I had even started letting go of the lost time. Then it happened again. On the night of our last day at that job, our manager offered to buy pizza for anyone who wanted to go. I got back to my room around 8 p.m., took a 10-minute shower, threw on clean clothes, and I was ready to go to the pizza place. I walked outside of my hotel room and was about to knock on the guy's door next to me because I wasn't sure who was driving. Then I happened to check my phone and saw the clock. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I can't even come up with the words to express how I felt when I saw that. I also had 2 missed calls and a voicemail from my coworker next door, but I ignored that until later. I don't know what happened inside of me because this was a level of stress I had never felt before. Mentally, the only thing I could do was walk away through the parking lot. I wasn't even going anywhere, I just couldn't be there. I didn't know how to deal with it happening again, and that time had been a huge chunk of time, over 5 hours. I don't know if it was the anxiety or something else, but I fully went into a state of depersonalization where I felt separated from my body. I ended up walking far away from the motel and finally stopped at a Taco Bell parking lot before turning around because I was getting so cold. When I got back to the motel, I checked the voicemail, and it was my coworker asking if I was coming to get pizza. That entire dinner had come and gone, and I guess everyone assumed I didn't want to go and had gone to sleep. For the second time that week, I stayed awake until morning and spent 2 more hours on the phone with my wife. We all left early that morning, and it was a quiet ride home for me. Everyone noticed, so I made up an excuse and told them I was coming down with something. I couldn't say the truth to a bunch of guys I work with, and I really didn't want to think about it or talk about it more than I already had with my wife. What's so crazy about that trip is I never had another experience like it outside of Williston. I left my job a year later in 2013 when I went full-time with my business, but before I quit, I was on 2 other out-of-town projects, and those trips were completely uneventful. I've only ever shared this story with a small amount of people. Some of those people have suggested things like a brain tumor and carbon monoxide poisoning in the motel room, but one friend said it sounded like an abduction event, which was something I had already been thinking of on my own. The reason I had thought of that was the intense vibrations I felt. It was so violent and obviously strong enough to make the AC fins shake, so it had to be real. I just can't understand how nobody else felt it. I had definitely heard of lost time before this happened, but I never thought of it as something real. Now I know exactly how real it is. Thankfully, I've never had any abduction dreams or repressed memories pop up like other people have, but I can't say I don't worry about it a little bit. The only thing I know for sure is that 2 separate pieces of my life were taken from me. I just don't know what took them. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.